One morning I was sitting in a coffee shop, reflecting on the chaos of life and wondering what God was doing in the midst of all the insanity that I was feeling. And so I opened my Bible, and once again I read Psalm 131. Lord, my heart is not proud, my eyes are not haughty. I do not get involved in things too great or too wondrous for me. Instead, I have calmed and quieted my soul. It's one of those Holy Spirit moments, those times where you read a passage that you've read numerous times, and yet something new stands out to you. Something jumps off the page in a way that you've never seen it before. And for me, in that coffee shop, it was one word. It was the word instead. Verse 2 starts, "Instead, I have calmed and quieted my soul." Instead carried the gravitas I needed for my soul that day. Instead is defined as a preferred alternative, a replacement. Instead suggests that there are choices available, but of those choices, one is favored. Instead asks us to choose the preferred option over the popular. Instead of a cup of soda, I should grab a glass of water. Instead of gorging on a cheeseburger, I should be eating a salad. And sure, a cheeseburger and a Coke may be the popular option, but my doctor would prefer that I would have a salad and some water. A healthy meal is favored. According to Psalm 131, I could choose to follow my own leading. I could allow my pride and arrogance to guide my life. An ego-driven life is the popular way to journey, but it's not the healthiest. In the eyes of the psalmist, the preferred choice is to calm your heart and to quiet your soul with God. Instead, I have calmed and quieted my soul. As I sat in that coffee shop and I reflected on the word instead, I drew this picture. Instead is the dividing line between being controlled by our circumstances and surrendering to God. I could allow my life to be ruled by chaos, struggle, restlessness, and rage, or instead I could ask God to calm and quiet. I could look to Him to still and satisfy my soul, and to come to Him for rest and peace. Life is defined by danger, trials, confusion, and uncertainty. It leaves us angry and overloaded and ready to cry. These things want to capsize our hearts and drown our souls. And instead of giving in to the reckless demands of society, the Bible offers an alternative. We have a choice. There's a preferred replacement, a substitute for the hurried and chaotic life. It is instead. Instead of the terrors at night, we can embrace the stillness of daybreak. Instead of anxiety that wants to overwhelm, we could seek the peace that passes understanding. Instead of accepting the chaos, we can embrace calm and quiet. Recently, I participated in a spiritual practice known as Ignatian contemplation. It's a special form of prayer developed by the 16th century theologian Ignatius of Loyola, who's the founder of the Jesuit order. In this spiritual practice, a person meditates on a story from the Bible, preferably a story from the Gospels. Using their imagination, they become one of the characters in that story. They participate in the scene, interacting with Jesus and others. That day, I chose the story found in Mark 4, the story where Jesus calmed the storm. One night after a long day of ministry, Jesus gets onto a boat and promptly falls asleep. While sailing across the sea, the disciples experience a terrible storm. This storm was beyond anything they'd ever experienced before, and these fishermen who had spent their lives on their sea were overwhelmed. Now, in the first century culture, chaos is often described as something that's coming from the sea, and this storm quickly embodies the forces of chaos attempting to undo these rugged men. And some have also suggested that these forces of chaos may be the devil himself, attempting to do away with the Son of God while he lay asleep, vulnerable in the boat. These forces of chaos have had their way with Jesus' disciples. and they're doing all that they can to stay afloat. They're terrified, realizing that all their knowledge and training have blown away with the gale force winds. Their pride and arrogance has been washed away, and finally they turn to Jesus. When the chaos of life attempt to overtake us, how do we respond? Our first attempt often comes from our proud hearts and our haughty eyes. We have lofty ambitions on how we're going to get out of danger. Perhaps we'll lower the sails or turn the rudder. We grab a bucket and start heaving water off the side, but soon we realize the futility of our ways. The storms of life are out of control, and we are at a loss. Finally, we turn to Jesus. Wake up, Jesus! Don't you care that we're drowning? Grab a bucket. Chaos has taken control. We expect Jesus to join our efforts. We expect him to come alongside and just help us find a way out of this predicament. Instead of doing his part, Jesus does something unexpected. Instead of joining the fray, Jesus steps into the chaos. Instead of bailing out water, he speaks to the storm. Instead of helping contain, he commands, "Silence! Be still!" And suddenly, there's a great calm. Instead of bailing us out of our problems, he calms our hearts and he quiets our souls. Psalm 107 shares the plight of men who face storms and cry out for rescue. It tells how God calms the sea and guides the sailors home. It's uncanny how this section of the psalm connects to the story in Mark 4, and amazing how both of these intertwine with Psalm 131. I took the liberty of reworking this psalm just a little bit. Courage melting in anguish, reeled and staggered like drunkards, wisdom confounded. Instead, cry out to the Lord. He stills the storms, waves are hushed, a calm heart and a quiet soul. He guides me home. His works are too great and too wondrous. I will exalt him to all people. When we face storms in life, our first instinct is to steer into the chaos, using our own wisdom to try to handle the situation. But when we quickly discover how the storms of life overtake and try to capsize us, we realize that there's an alternative. Instead of following our selfish ways, instead of letting our pride and arrogance steer our lives, we can give control to God. We can invite Jesus to calm our hearts and quiet our souls. Instead is a cry of surrender. O Lord, my heart is not proud. My eyes are not haughty. I do not get involved with things too great or too wondrous for me. Instead, I have calmed and quieted my soul.